Welcome to Discourse. That's Abel.
This is Tony.
And today we're talking about The Foundation by Isaac Asimov. So, way back in high school, The Foundation was one of the very first science fiction stories I read. And that started my love for science fiction in general. I read the entire series of The Foundation in high school in some library just huddled in a corner.
Jeez.
But I believe you recently started reading The Foundation, right? You read book one, which is called The Foundation.
Yep. Yeah, I didn't even know about these books in high school, or not even in recent life, just until the Apple TV series came out. But I did read the first book, and yeah, it's a lot of talk. Right?
Yeah, it's a lot of talking. It's basically just two guys in a room talking.
Mm-hmm.
And the first book is actually a collection of short stories that Isaac Asimov wrote back in like 1941. During World War II, he wrote a collection of short stories for Astounding magazine. It was like a science fiction magazine, I believe. Yeah. And then later on, a publishing company picks up the 4 short stories that he wrote, publishes in one book called The Foundation.
Yeah, and it got really popular after that, right?
And it slowly took off after that, yeah. So the editor of Astounding magazine, I believe, kept asking Isaac Asimov to write more stories because people really liked The Foundation. So he convinced Isaac to write all of these stories. And then after all of the Foundation stories were written, he kind of got tired of The Foundation and then started writing other things. So Isaac Asimov wrote hundreds of books, a lot of them nonfiction, some of them science fiction. He wrote the Foundation series. He also wrote a very good robot series and a couple of other offshoot books. What I really like about his series is that even his offshoot books, all of his books seem to happen in the same universe. And every now and then in a book and in a story, he makes a reference to something from another book series that he wrote. And it's just amazing that he is able to connect all of it. So I then had to convince Abel to start reading this science fiction series. But I did not sell it very well because I was like, it's a fantastic series. It's mind-blowing. You got to read it. And he's like, what is it about? I was like, it's kind of just guys in a room talking about stuff.
Is there any fighting? Is there any like Star Wars lasers shootouts? No.
Yeah, none of that. It's just people outsmarting each other, talking about possibilities and things happening, and that's basically it. So the gist of The Foundation is there was this mathematician named Hari Seldon who creates this new kind of mathematics, I guess you call it, called psychohistory, which is used to determine like the humanity's future, basically, how things are going to permeate and how things are going to end up. So with this, he is exiled to the end of the universe because the emperor at the time does not like the heresy that he's spreading, that the empire is going to fall. And Hari Seldon, with his mathematics to predict the future, knows this, so has a plan to set up a foundation of scientists at the end of the universe so that they can focus on, he says they're going to focus on creating an Encyclopedia Galactica to save humanity's information to then bring them back out of the barbarian times sooner.
The dark times.
The dark times. And the emperor buys it. So he goes there, he sets it up, but then little do you know, they actually go there to set up a new, or it's basically the seed for a new empire they set up that are run mostly by scientists. And that's what the Foundation, I think, series is about, is Hari Seldon, his mathematics, him setting up a new foundation at the end of the universe, and then that foundation growing into a big empire that then takes on the old empire.
Yeah, and I think it was a big deal because the empire was called the Galactic Empire. Kind of like Star Wars and I guess other sci-fi movies, they ruled not just Earth, but different galaxies outside of our own. Like
I like that scene in one of the Star Wars movies where you have all of like the senators sitting in like this one hall. That's kind of how I imagine the Galactic Empire being.
Yeah, exactly. So it's huge, and they've been, not the same emperor, but the same ruling party has been ruling for like generations, and it's been great according to them. So when the Hari Seldon starts saying, your empire is going to collapse, there's going to be chaos, there's going to be revolts, and people start hearing about it, they start questioning the empire, right, which is not good for the ruling party. And before anarchy and everything, you know, broke apart and caused chaos, they exiled him. To them it was an exile, but for him it was...
It's part of the game plan.
Yep. Yeah, he left with 51 mathematicians.
say 51? I felt like it was a lot.
Yeah,
Come
well,
on,
I
you didn't know?
think he had a lot of followers. Like a lot of people left with them because of their families, but
Oh,
they
that's
do
what,
take
I
them
think
to
that's what
court.
it was. It's like mathematicians and their family.
Yep, and their families and other people that help support because they have to support each other as their own colony. So it's the mathematicians that are solely focused on. It was originally called the Seldon Project, but it's the Encyclopedia Foundation, as you mentioned. So it's 51 mathematicians, including Gal Dornick, which plays a big part.
Yeah, so
Right.
there's a lot of characters throughout here that play huge parts in the fictional
books.
history that they write. So there's a lot of great characters that are then taken over to the Apple TV series, but they're gender swapped and successfully in some cases, not so successful in other cases. But what I really like about this science fiction series is that it was written in 1941, right? So during World War II, they didn't have a lot of technology. They didn't even have the internet. They barely invented computers.
Yeah, no
right?
thoughts about robots. Everything was still like RC controlled, if anything.
Oh yeah, this is right. Like they barely had radio technology.
Yeah.
They barely knew about computers because they tried to use it to break the German code.
Yep.
Give me a minute. Let me look up a note here.
Radar was just invented.
So the internet became popular in the 90s, but ARPANET was invented in 1969. So I mentioned this just because I want to know that this science fiction series is written before the internet, right? Before computers, before robots, before anything we know.
Yeah.
And then this guy is predicting what things are going to be like in the future, which is amazing in some cases, but kind of falls flat in other cases.
Yeah. Well, one good thing was artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Which back then they just called it a smart robot.
So in the Foundation series, they do mention robots, but robots are this like mysterious historical aspect of humanity where the robots rose up and we had to fight them back, and now robots don't exist in the galaxy because of that.
Yep.
So robots are just barely mentioned. But as you know, in the Apple TV series, there's a robot named Demerzel, which is true in the book series. He also is Demerzel in the series, although again gender swapped. Demerzel is a male in the book series.
Yeah, they changed genders and also professions. Right?
Yeah, there's some characters that didn't cross paths before, but now cross paths in the Apple TV series.
Yep.
So one thing that I thought was interesting is that he, smoking was popular in the 1940s. He mentions a lot of people smoking in these books. It's supposed to be the future, which, statistically speaking, nowadays people are smoking less and less. Also, in the future, I imagine they're going to smoke less and less, seeing how if you have to travel through space, you're not going to be smoking on a spacecraft because you have to recycle all of the air.
Yep, reuse it.
You know what I mean? So I don't think people are going to be smoking in the future, but his characters smoke.
And it wasn't just like cigarettes, it's full on cigars. And some were like vegan cigars, whatever that means. So that was interesting.
And what's also interesting in the series is that they don't have any kind of communication devices. So he couldn't think of like a cell phone or something like it where they can just communicate with each other. In the Apple TV series, they solved that. They have something like that, but not in the books.
Yeah, in the books they were still communicating by like couriers. Like someone had to come from the Empire.
You had to write something on paper, hand to someone,
hand deliver it or send someone to send the message.
So and then, thousands of years in the future, you're still writing notes on papers and sending it by carrier pigeon across the galaxy.
Exactly.
Also, newspapers. He talks about.
They were still in the press.
Yeah, he talks about some incidents where I think he ends up in a newsroom and there's papers on the floor and they're printing headlines.
Yep. Yeah. So those definitely fell short.
Yeah.
On the actual feature.
Which I think the word is like quaint, right? Like it was very good for the time and it's still very interesting because he has some interesting concepts, but the technology doesn't hold up. Like he mentions one time, he basically, so one really good aspect is he basically does describe a Kindle, basically, right? It's like a computer device that holds tons of books and is battery powered, but which is amazing if you think about it. A guy in 1940 basically invented a Kindle, but he cannot think of a rechargeable battery. He's worried about his basically Kindle device running out of battery, and he's like, oh no, what am I going to do if it runs out of battery? And in my 2021 head, I'm like, just plug that bad boy in, like charge it up.
Replace the batteries.
But he is like, oh no, we're gonna have to replace the fusion cells. It's gonna be complicated.
Oh yeah, they still talked a lot about nuclear power.
Yeah, so
No
nuclear
solar,
power is the best power ever invented, and there's nothing better. And that's kind of where the foundation derives its power, right? The foundation is set up as a collection of scientists, and those scientists are super smart, and they end up on a planet that doesn't have a lot of resources, so they have to then trade their intelligence to help all the barbarian worlds around them keep up their technology.
Yeah, it was like the province of Anacreon.
Anacreon, yeah.
Something like that.
So in the book, yeah, Anacreon does kind of act like the antagonist, and the Foundation has to use their wits to outsmart them. In the show, it's a little bit more violent.
Yeah, which I liked, because reading the books, as we mentioned, is just a bunch of guys talking, and they talked about certain scenarios where there's going to be a war, there's a possible revolt, the collapse of the empire, which does happen, but the book just glosses over it. Yeah. Like one chapter, oh, hell's gonna break loose. The next chapter, 10 years later.
100 years later.
Or 100 years
yeah,
later.
You're right. So you gotta remember these are short stories, right? So yeah, in between all the short stories, like hundreds of years pass sometimes.
Yeah.
And there's not really a connection between characters in that sense, which is interesting in the Apple TV show. A lot of characters do meet, but not in the short stories because there's so much time in between. Yeah. And for some reason, people don't live very long in the future. Like he couldn't think of like gene editing or anything like that to make us live longer.
So like we read a lot of sci-fi books, so we could fill in the gaps with like just our imagination, all the possible scenarios. But if you've never read sci-fi or not into it, it would just be really dry.
Yeah, don't read. It is super dry if you don't have an imagination.
Yeah, or are used to like this genre. So that's why I think the Apple TV series did a good job in filling in the gaps with a lot of action.
You're right. I was worried when I saw the trailer for the show because I saw like people shooting at each other and like airplanes flying by. I was like, whoa, none of that happened in the books, right?
Nobody even threw a punch in the book.
Yeah. Nobody throws any punches. There's hardly any action whatsoever. It's just people talking. But Abel convinced me the show is really good in filling in the world around the characters in the book, where the characters, again, just in a room talking. But there's a lot of stuff happening in the world. Yeah. And the Apple TV series does a very good job of fleshing that out.
The only thing I found weird is in the Apple TV series, the ruling party is one guy that cloned himself for generations, and he clones himself to be born so that there's 3 stages living at the same time. There's like a little kid who goes by Don. Jay. He's supposed to just shadow the other ones to learn from them until he becomes a ruler. Then there's Day, who's the ruling Cleon, as they're called. He's like probably in his prime. You could tell he's tall, he's authoritative, he's good. And then there's Dusk, who's the old guy who's retired, and he's just supposed to guide the other ones into taking over and doing a good job. But they're the same guy.
They're the same,
right?
Yeah, they're cloned basically, right? In the books, it's like a normal monarchy, but in the series, it's a genetic dynasty, they call it, which doesn't happen in the book, but I think is very fascinating in the TV show because basically that's what we're going to be facing here in a few short years, right? It's going to happen very soon where people are going to be cloned, or you're going to be able to go to a computer and decide what traits and genes you want your child to have, and you're going to put it all together and they're going to make a child for you. So these are problems we're definitely going to have, but it wasn't a problem in the book. I think they do make a mention of a genetic dynasty somewhere towards the end of, I believe it was the Foundation and Empire, where this character called the Mule shows up, and he's a mutant with psychic powers. No, not really psychic powers, but like mental powers where he can control people's emotions. Spoiler alert, if you have not read the series yet, I'm about to ruin it for you. So the Mule basically throws a wrench in Psychohistory and in Hari Seldon's plan because he's an individual. The plan was never meant to predict the outcome of an individual, and he's a mutant, no less, and he just throws it all out of whack, which is great for the series because you always are on this line where Hari Seldon has the best plan ever, and then there's a wrench thrown in, and then how do you put that back together after it's been destroyed?
Yeah, these are a lot of books, so you wouldn't think that the TV series could cover all of these, even in, 5-10 seasons, I don't know, but in just 3 episodes, I think they covered most of the first book.
They covered most of, the first couple of short stories, you're right? Yeah, and they kind of interweave them. So if you're wondering if the show is based on the books, very loosely
Yeah.
based. I like the show for a different reason. They took some names and some starting points from the series and then just went in their own direction.
It's like
It was
those,
fine.
yeah, it's like those movies based on a true story, but that true story is only like 2% of the whole movie.
Yeah.
Just the idea, But the books, to me, or at least the one I read, does leave a lot open, which I think the TV series, not just with the storyline, but the colors, the action, the sounds, it's pretty modern. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is amazing how well they put that show together. They put a lot of money into it, or at least the CGI is fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I feel like it's on par with The Expanse. Internet, go ahead and hate me down in the comments. I think they should slow down a little bit and then explore the different pieces because there's a lot happening. I really like the whole genetic dynasty thing. I really want to explore that more. I like seeing I want to see the Foundation come to it into its own kind of empire, but I think they just need to slow down a bit to let that breathe and put it on par with The Expanse.
Yeah, just the characters, it is way different. Like in the book, one character is a mayor. In the TV series, they're a warden, which is like a sheriff.
Yeah. And it's gender swap. It's a girl.
Gender swap. And the importance, too, is not the same. Because the mayor in the book, he played a big role in the way that outer colony was built and avoided war. Where in the TV series, it's just a sheriff just wandering the land. Hey, you doing good?
Yeah.
That's it.
It's kind of like a sheriff from kind of like the show Firefly, like a space western, like a warden kind of deal, which is cool. I love the character in the Apple TV series, but it's not the character in the books.
Not the same. Way not the same. Good thing the Apple series, they do have not just the great characters that they built themselves, but the actors and actresses. They got a good cast.
Oh man,
really good
they
cast.
are fantastic. Isn't Hari Seldon in The Expanse?
He is. He is. A lot of people recognize that. Same everything. It seems like the same character, just different job.
Yeah, prophetic character. I think he's not as antagonistic maybe as he was in The Expanse.
Mm-hmm.
He's more worldly and wise in the Foundation, but yeah, he's basically kind of like the leader type role in this one.
Leader.
Which maybe that character is just very good at being a leader role in a sci-fi series
Of a rebellious faction. Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. Would you have enjoyed this novel if you read this in high school?
No. Not at all.
Because you like more fantasy stories, right?
More fantasy,
hardcore fantasy,
more action, things killing each other, not just talk.
So, with that said, would you be surprised if I told you that back in 1966, the World Sci-Fi Convention awarded the Hugo Award for Best Series? So, the Foundation trilogy was up against the Lord of the Rings series back in 1966. And the people back then voted to give it to the Foundation series, which I believe at the time was only 3 books.
Over Lord of the Rings?
Over Lord of the Rings.
These books.
These books right here, where people are just sitting in a room talking for most of the time.
Wow.
They said back then that it was better than the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
All right. Well,
and if you're surprised, Isaac Asimov was also surprised.
Yeah, because I kind of read something where they just not forced him, but told him he had to write this quick status, right?
There was a couple of books where he was basically forced to. I think he wrote the first 1 and 2 out of his own free will, but then he basically had to be coerced to write the rest of the series.
So I am surprised, but I guess at the time, thinking about the time, not surprised. Fantasy has been around for a while, so people are kind of used to that. Even though Lord of the Rings, the writing and everything is great, sci-fi back then was like it just people. Was this before the moon landing?
I think so, 1940. Well, 1960. Oh, great. Let me look up the moon landing. Hold on. So the moon landing is 1959. He wrote the first one in 1940 and was awarded the Hugo Award for Best Series in 1966.
Okay, so it was awarded after the moon landing. So I think that helped them out. Because that...
You think the moon landing helped
his chances? Helped them out. Because then people got to see what was possible. So they're like, oh my god, this could be true. This could actually happen.
So people's minds were already out in space. I see where it's going.
And where fantasy was like, oh, that's cool, all right, but we're not going to find elves or dwarves anywhere. Like, where this is like, this is possible. My children could be in space. We're going to have a galactic empire. It was a lot of, like I guess, inspiring to them, and like it broadened their imagination where fantasy was just for fun, I guess, at the time.
Yeah, I think you hit on something great. That's why I like science fiction, because I think that it's possible. The only thing standing in our way is time, right? It's
Time and
eventually
technology,
possible. Whereas I'm not sure I'm going to ever meet a dragon.
yeah. Right? No.
Or maybe a dwarf riding a
Dragon or some magician is just gonna come by and like shoot stuff at you. Like no.
Blast me with some fire and some ice and then fly away. And
Yeah.
I'm like, did I just get blasted by an elf?